Okay, so we're gonna do part 2 of the Angron lore. We just finished off with Leman Russ and Angron having a fight, and Leman Russ bringing Angron back to the Emperor. So yeah, shame we couldn't do that with Magnus, but you know, it is what it is. Angron seems like a pretty testy character. He likes to kill people. He's just a bit deluded. He has nails in his skull, so you know, definitely not a guy you want to be meeting on the street. Him and Conrad, the 2 Primarchs you probably want to steer clear from if you want to stay alive. Let's continue with this video and do part 2. I mean, obviously there isn't 2 parts, it's the same video, I just like to cut them up.
Despite all of his transgressions though, Angron was still shockingly efficient at bringing systems to compliance, despite how questionable his approach was. Eventually, it became time for the Emperor to send Horus to try and whittle some form of reason from the twisted Red Giant's mind. This, of course,
was
proved to not be a stellar idea.
Was Horus already corrupted?
Horus immediately picked at the barely healed wound of Angron's spite towards their father, turning him to his side without much convincing at all. Most of the other Primarchs needed, a lot of manipulation or chiding. Angron simply just needed to hear the plan. Thus, Angron became one of the first 4 original traitor legions. Sons of Horus included, of course, and the other were the Word Bearers and the Death Guard. Well, plus the World Eaters. And in the early portions of the war, the World Eaters took part in both Istvaan III and Istvaan V, as we talked about. Remember, the first Istvaan battle, Istvaan III, was an act that would purge the traitor legions of their loyalist factions. This is the initial play that Horus used to both mask the other traitor legions, the ones that were not there, such as the Night Lords, the Iron Warriors, and the such. And this is the initial play that helped lure loyalist legions into his trap at Istvaan V. Angron led the second wave of drop pods on the planet after it was completely virus bombed. That was the point was, hey, we'll have all of our loyalist factions drop onto the planet first, fighting off these rebellious cults from Slaanesh, and then virus bomb the entire planet. And it actually didn't kill off as many loyalists as it wanted. It wanted to, or the original plan was to kill off almost all of them, or if not the entirety of them, and then finish them off from orbit. But instead, it only killed about 2/3 of the. It only killed about 1/3 of the actual loyalist factions. They were warned by Tarvitz Saul of the Emperor's children, and they were able to kind of get into shelter. But this result here, that where Angron lands on the planet to go kill off more of his brothers, was not part of the plan, and it led to this prolonged 2-month campaign in which the traitor legions had to hunt down their brothers mercilessly, cleansing all portions of the legion still loyal to the Emperor. And we'll cover Istvaan III in its own video like we did for 5. I mean, there is a lot of nuances to cover. I mean, there's so many players in that battle, the Garvio Loken and all the portions of the Sons of Horus.
That's fucked up. My man actually went down there to go and purge survivors.
They're actually still loyal to the Emperor, so there's a lot going on there. Even more so, I'd say, than Istvaan V, because Istvaan V was a pretty quick portion of the end of the Fulgrim book. Istvaan III almost had its own book entirely. So, in Flight of the Eisenstein or whatever is one of the covers it the most, or it's the 3rd book in the series. I can't remember 100%, but it is a huge chunk of one of the books. Now, the biggest portion of the Horus Heresy that Angron took part in was the Shadow War against Ultramar. And this is a huge point in the history of the war, because a full attack on Terra couldn't just be waged heedlessly. They couldn't just go, all right, guys, Istvaan went well. Next stop, Terra. Honk, honk. Nope, doesn't go like that. The plan was for Lorgar and his word bearers to attack Calth, C-A-L-T-H. Start this gigantic warp storm called the Ruin Storm and lock down the largest legion and segmentum, the Ultima Segmentum. The Ruin Storm, what it actually did was it prevented interstellar travel between the majority of the Imperium. It kind of cut like a huge swath through it. And most importantly, it shrouded Terra entirely, so that other fleets couldn't see the Emperor's guiding Astronomicon, which is what all the other legions used to move from point to point, nor make contact with the Imperium through astropaths, because they could just, the astropathic choir is what it's called, can actually communicate through the warp and pretty much deliver messages. We see this during what's called Old Night. We talked about that before, right? How the Terra is completely covered by warp storms and is cut off from the rest of the old Imperium, pre-Emperor. So this is kind of like that, a rehash of that very same moment. There was also a bit of a grudge match attached to this. Lorgar desperately wanted to deliver vengeance upon the Ultramarines. Way back in the very beginning, or not very beginning, or in one portion of the Great Crusade, the Emperor and Bobby G swing on over to Lorgar's, favorite world and just glass the entire city because it's looked like as deification to the Emperor. And Lorgar always kind of like looked. He was very insulted, I guess you could say, by Bobby G because it looked like Bobby G had kind of a smirk going this whole time, like, aha, I'm the chosen son, you are nothing. And that's kind of like the big thing with Lorgar is he's the word bearer, the bearer of the word of the Emperor. He almost has this zealous.
He's the book writer. Oh, that's not the one you want to be, is it?
Attachment to the Emperor prior to, of course, his fall to Heresy. So he definitely hates the Ultramarines. And we'll discuss the details of this campaign in earnest when we talk about Lorgar, but a good deal of the fighting was actually done in tandem with the World Eaters, their berserker rampage kind of tearing through the calculated and measured resolve that the Ultramarines have. Rampaging through multiple worlds, the World Eaters were lured to a trap on the world of Armatura. Now, there isn't a ton of super important lore things to happen in this battle, except for maybe one of the most badass portions of the war, but it's not like, hey, this battle is the ultimate culminating moment of blank, blank, and blank. None of that happens here. Instead, Angron's implants kind of started to fail him during this campaign, and they would sometimes leave the Red Angel in such a desperate berserker rage that he was completely unable to be stopped, unless the remaining librarians of the Legion convened their psychic strength to stabilize their father. And remember, the Council of Nicaea has already happened. These guys cannot use their librarian abilities in the open. They kind of have to do this in secret. The same thing interestingly enough, the same thing kind of happens with Sanguinius, and we'll talk about that in detail later, but it's very interesting how much Sanguinius or the Blood Angels and the World Eaters have a very weird kind of parallel. The Blood Angels were supposed to be another Coronate faction or Fallen Legion, but we'll go into that again later. The result, though, was Angron leading a charge against a fucking Titan. As Lorgar tried to help, he was pinned down. And as the Titan went to crush both the Primarchs, Angron stops the Titan's foot from falling on his own head with his own hands. He uses his hands, he raises them above his head, the Titan goes to stop, and he stops the Titan outright.
My man caught the Titan's foot. I don't believe it. That's crazy, bro.
And he goes so far as to reverse the Titan's movement.
What?
Holy God! This is just crazy. So he reverses the footfall and saves Lorgar, and eventually, though, Angron is actually covered entirely with a building. It completely falls on him and it buries him underneath tons and tons and tons of rubble. The librarians were able to locate and kind of channel their Primarch's fury to kind of get him and pull him out of his haze and help him get out of this rubble, but it saved him from being buried to death, I guess you could say, buried alive under a building. I guess it's the only way you can kill a Primarch is burying him under tons and tons of fucking building.
Well, would have been the second Primarch to die like that. Lionel Johnson is under a ton of buildings too.
But in this moment, obviously thankless as he hates Psykers, Angron discards his axe, Gorechild. Karn then takes the discarded axe and repairs it, kind of gaining his famous axe that we see all throughout all the remaining editions in which Karn the Betrayer is popular. There's a big kind of superstition with that too. Angron kind of forbids anyone from picking up his discarded weapons or from any of his legionnaires using their discarded weapons, because it's a gladiator superstition that if you do that, it brings ill luck or bad luck on you, and it can damn the outcome of something. So that's kind of a big thing there. So he does it in secret and recrafts and repairs the blade without Angron's consent. But after Armatura, Lorgar encourages Angron to essentially seek closure on his home planet of Nuceria. Lorgar obviously has another motive, but Angron agrees. Both Primarchs take their respective Shadow Force and journey to Nuceria, which is in the Ultima Segmentum, as we've addressed earlier. And the big objective here is to find a way to get the Butcher's Nails to stop killing Angron. Lorgar realizes, hey, these things are degrading at a much more rapid rate, and they will kill you faster than we originally planned. But that's, of course, yeah, he's saying, oh, go get closure, go get those fixed, but Lorgar has another plan in mind. So, as both Primarchs were on the planet, Robert Guilliman of the Ultramarines, as we know, exited the warp at the head of a ragtag fleet of 40-some-odd ships. And he'd been tracking them after Armatura. Guilliman was eager to exact the same vengeance upon Lorgar and Angron that they had exacted upon him. And this wasn't the gleaming, resplendent fleet that we've come to expect of Ultramarines, though. This was...
My man went to do a 1v2. You know, no offense to Bobby G, but we know he is not one of the best fighters around. You know, if it was like Lehman Russ or Lionel Johnson or even, you know, Fulgrim, you know, trying to do 1v2, maybe. But Bobby G, I mean, he had the biggest legion, I guess, but still. I mean, and Lorgar was probably the worst fighter, but by this, Angron sounds like one of the best, so, you know. Bobby G seems to have fought every traitor. He fought Magnus. I'm not even going to go for he's fought pretty much everyone, except maybe Horus.
The shattered remnants of 1,000 conflicts, you know, hardened veterans of the Battle of Calth and many adjoining worlds. And the result is this brutal void battle that is not the calculated distance attack that it usually is, but rather a dirty, brutal melee. The Ultramarines flagship, Courage Above All, kind of running abeam the flagships of the Word Bearers and World Eaters, the Fidelitas Lex and Conquer, respectively, delivering crippling salvos. You know, 1,000 small ships sort of tearing wounds into these larger ships as they desperately try to make planetfall on New Syria. Eventually gaining a foothold, the Ultramarines begin to deploy these among the ruined cities of the planet. They deploy these kind of strongholds, these beachheads, quote unquote. But the World Eaters just to consume each strong point as more and more are created. So it's just this kind of ravening, berserking horde against this very cold, determined, but equally as vindictive legion. After long, the Fidelitas Lex is brought out of orbit, smashing into the planet's ocean as it kind of just limps along and just trudges smoke and everything down into the planet. Lorgar, joining the battle on the surface, with Guilliman pursuing him in tow. You know, he has to leave the Fidelitas Lex, and Guilliman does the same out of his flagship. What results is another brutal melee. This time not of Starship and Bolter, but of brother and blood. Lorgar's power maul sweeping huge, cleaving strikes at his brother, Guilliman who dodges and attacks in kind with his power fist and power sword. Lorgar is, again, we've talked about this, not known for being an accomplished fighter, but he is still a Primarch and manages to land a devastating blow on Guilliman's head, fracturing his skull, but not before the Ultramarines Primarch destroys the Urizen's sternum with his power fist. Urizen is another title for Lorgar, so we know. I don't know if I've ever addressed that. In that moment, Angron bursted out of the melee, his blades coated in blue ceramite as he hunted his brother Guilliman. Angron leapt into the fray, attacking Bobby G with a flurry of blows that his brother answered in kind. The two kind of fighting
My man has a fractured skull. He destroys Lorgar, which, to be fair, is probably the easiest one to beat. And now he's going to fight this guy when he's beaten up. Lord.
Indeed, furtive pace that outmatched the previous duel tenfold. Bobby G went to deliver his patented Ultra Bobby G punch to the chest as he did to Lorgar previously. Doing this, he fractured one of the skulls of Angron's brethren, knocking it to the ground as Guilliman moved toward the stunned Angron, and he smashed the skull to dust. Taking a step backward, upon reaching the world, Angron kind of discovers that the masters of New Syria spread lies about the results of the rebellion. So he constructs this like bandolier of skulls from his fallen comrades that were left to rot in the desert, and he basically goes to town on everything. And one of these skulls is the one that Guilliman knocks off of his chest, and when he steps on it and smashes it to dust, this immediately enraged Angron sent this kind of resonance deep into the warp, one that his remaining librarians felt, as well as the kind of warp-sensitive Lorgar. Lorgar then, in turn, began this dark ritual and the ultimate goal of their arrival on New Syria. Summoning up the Neverborn from the Aether, he pinned his brother in place. You know, black and purple clouds enveloped him as he raged wildly against his otherworldly restraints, his vindication stolen from him once more, just as it was from his father, the Emperor. Here, Angron would become the first demon Primarch. The Butcher's Nails, which were once killing him, were now a thing of the past as they empowered his newly possessed form. Now a child of Khorne, the first demon Primarch, Angron, rose in the stead of his once corporeal form. Immediately, Bobby G fled the scene, unable to both comprehend and combat such a foe. The resulting kind of portions of the Horus Heresy.
So that's what Lorgar was there to do. Turn him into the first demon Primarch. So Lorgar was kind of just that, like, their go-between, the Chaos Gods and everyone else. He was just the messenger for them now, not the Emperor.
Are still not fleshed out. I mean, the books that are coming out are going to really kind of bring more of that to the fore, but for the most part, this kind of ends what we know about Angron in the Horus Heresy. We do know he takes part in the Siege of Terra, and he is there. The World Eaters are there kind of running up and down the ramparts. We know that Kharn the Betrayer is actually killed during the Siege of Terra. He's kind of like flung upon a pile of bodies, but he still gets resurrected and comes back as the chosen champion of not only his legion, but of Khorne himself, because we do know that they do have a new god. The World Eaters completely changed their armor. It's now red and bronze in worship of their god, the Lord of Skulls. Now, the post-Heresy life of Angron is rather limited, as it is with most Primarchs that haven't re-entered the lore. And there are two large...
He's chilling with Tusker Demon Killer, bro. Allow him.
More standout things I want to discuss, though. One is the Dominion of Fire. It starts roughly kind of in the 38th millennium, and it's one of the largest incursions of chaos since the initial heresy, and really since, not counting the certain Black Crusades, of course. This was a 200-year-long war that took 4 chapters, 2 Titan legions, and over 30 Imperial Guard regiments to combat and retake. They knocked out 70 sectors. It is one of the most successful chaos invasions to date, not discounting, of course, the Wars of Armageddon. The first one, to be exact, is the important one here, and this is there are a lot of details for this fight, and we can do a series about the Wars of Armageddon if you guys want. I'm more than happy to do that, but the first one is the largest. You get this massive invasion at the head of an initial attack of space hulks with Khornate berserkers on them, followed, of course, by a massive invasion from the Eye of Terror itself, led by Angron. Space Wolves, Cadians, and a number of other chapters come to the aid of Armageddon in this kind of just titanic battle between the two forces. This is one of the few engagements where the Grey Knights are deployed en masse. A grand total of 109 Astartes make planetfall to battle the Demon Primarch. Usually they're only sent about in 1 or 2 squads or on little clandestine missions, but the final battle is just this complete bloodbath. Loyalist forces being killed in swaths by the combined might of Angron and his Khornate army. Eventually, Terramar Aurelian, the brother captain of the Third Brotherhood dispatched to the planet, is able to banish Angron after Hyperion, another Grey Knight, manages to shatter the Black Blade, which is the Chaos Sword of Angron. This costs Aurelian his life, but the battle is ultimately won. And of course, an additional cost. Only 13 of the original 109 Grey Knights make it out of the fight alive.
Oof.
So hopefully this video, well, a long time coming as it was, really...
That would have took them a long time to rebuild those numbers, because the Grey Knight's trials are bloody insane, bro. You ain't building up your ranks after that. If you haven't seen the Grey Knight reactions I've done, bro, becoming a Grey Knight is so difficult in 40k. So when you lose 109, or close enough to it, what do you say, like 12 were left or whatever, bro? I mean, they need some rebuilding.
He helps shed some light on the tragic history of Angron. You have this Primarch that ultimately is bound by a very strong honor system and a sense of brotherhood, but driven mad by these implants that are a result of his circumstances rather than his own design. You're kind of betrayed by his father and then by his brother. He's really a wrathful Primarch, sure, but he's really vindictive in his rage. I think that the Imperium sort of views Angron as this berserker murderer, but I think he's more of a lost soul, kind of rampaging through the futility of the worlds around him. Now that he's a Demon Primarch, he's even more so in that situation. But we shall see what the future holds for the Lord of the Red Sands. One of the big rumors out of the 40k rumor mill is that Angron will return with his Khornate army book in late 2018, early 2019. So we'll see if that comes to fruition, as Leman Russ is also rumored to be returning. It'd be kind of this epic reunion, right? To see these two back on the tabletop in their new forms. You know, Leman Russ is supposed to be rumored to be almost Odin-like in his portrayal, more of a wizened old man than a youthful wolf lord. And we know the Demon Primarch to be Demon Primarch with bat wings and crazy ass faces and stuff. So there's quite a few things on the horizon, I think, for Angron, and I hope to get more fleshing out of him in the Horus Heresy, as well as his post-Heresy life, as more of 8th edition comes to fruition, as well as more of the Horus Heresy books come out. But thanks so much for watching here today, guys. Go ahead and comment below.
Alright, that's the end of that. So, Angron is one of those who you would class as a more tragic Primarch, like Conrad. You know, Conrad's probably the most tragic. You know, he was set up to fail from the start. Poor guy. Angron's kind of similar to that. Obviously, being a gladiator, having those needles implanted in his head, bro, those nails, was pretty much the end of him. He just became a warrior and a killer, and that's what he was known for, and that's what he was used for. maybe the Emperor could have made more of an effort to help him out, but he never really accepted the Emperor or wanted to be part of the Imperium. So you know, you gotta give him some credit for that. But obviously, I'm excited to see what happens with him next. I mean, I think if he fights Leman Russ, it might be a big rip. But I'm assuming their Games Workshop are building up. You know, as they say, every Primarch will return in the end times, right? So I'm assuming it's going to be a big Traitor vs Loyalist fight towards the end. You know, and we'll see what happens there. Maybe the Emperor will come back, who the hell knows. But yeah, man, that's the end of this video. If you enjoyed, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. You can subscribe to Italian Spartacus as well as myself. And yeah, before this helicopter ruins the video, I'll see you all next time.